The crucifixion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ was the turning point in history. It paved the way for the birth of the church age. Jesus, who is now seated at the right hand of the Father, has assumed all authority in heaven and on the earth. All authority. That means that Satan and his cosmic cohorts have been stripped of all rulership of the nations and all authority over your life and mine. All people of all nations, Jew and Gentile, who hear the good news and believe, are invited to become sons and daughters of the Most High. The Great Commission, to go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, will become the single most important mission for the believer. When the whole earth has heard the good news, then the fullness of the Gentiles will be realized, and Christ will return to rule and reign.
Last session we ended in the book of Acts and the idea of reclaiming the nations. And so I was just wondering about our future destiny as believers. Does that all come together somehow?
Yeah, there are a lot of threads that lead to this. I think maybe a good way to think about this is to focus on the way believers are described and talked about in different places in different ways. Some of these are more obvious than others. You have, for instance, this notion, let's just think in broad terms that, okay, God started, a family in Eden. There was a supernatural family already there. Humans were added to that family. This was the intention, to make humans fit for sacred space. We would all be with the Lord in His house, in His place. Again, one big happy family, them with us with them, and all of us with God, and so on and so forth. And then, we know that it just sort of blows up. And the rest of the story of Scripture is God trying to recover that original vision. And I've said before in our discussions, in our questions, in one place that the supernatural stuff is important because God will talk about believers, His human family, using terminology that is used of the supernatural family. Again, sort of to remind us that it's supposed to be one family, not two, but one. And if you think about that sort of thing and reclaiming the nations and recovering what was lost, all these big picture ideas, when you run into certain verses and you think about the vocabulary that's used, you start to work on this trajectory of what is the destiny, where does all this lead. One of those is holy ones. I think this is probably the easiest place to start. Holy ones in the Old Testament, overwhelmingly, there might be one exception, but holy ones, kedoshim in Hebrew, is a term used specifically of the members of the heavenly host, the divine council. The Greek equivalent of that in the Septuagint, again, Greek translation of the Old Testament, is hagioi, holy ones. We get our word like hagiography from it now. If you look in the New Testament, where does hagioi show up? It is always used of human believers. And Paul uses it all the time. Our translations have it saints. To the saints at the church of, fill in the blank. It's hagioi, to the holy ones. Holy ones, holy ones, holy ones. Believers are holy ones. Well, you're supposed to think about the fact that your destiny individually, you are going to become like them. You are going to become like God. And we know this from the doctrine of sanctification. But as John 1:12, but as many as received Him, to them He gave the authority to become the children, the sons of God. 1 John 3, we might as well go there. It's a familiar passage, but there's some really, again, very specific things that are said in there that I think in this context matter. So 1 John 3, obviously we just quoted John in his gospel, but in this letter, he writes, "See what kind of love the Father has given to us that we should be called children of God. And so we are." Again, look at we are already. "The reason why the world does not know us is that it did not know Him. Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know that when He appears, we shall be like Him, because we shall see Him as He is." So again, you get this notion of glorification. We are going to be made fit for sacred space in really an ultimate sense, because we're going to be right there with God, with his, the members of his heavenly host that are loyal to him. All of this is going to run full circle again. You get some other vocabulary too. Cloud of witnesses. This is, again, Hebrews 12. We're, surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. And we rightly, but incompletely, we will reference that back to Hebrews 11, which is, the so-called hall of faith, that whole passage. And we tend to sort of stop thinking about ourselves by virtue of the first verse. We are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which, clings to us so closely, so on and so forth. Looking unto Jesus. Oh, okay, we're in the same group as those Old Testament believers. Yeah, that's true. But this is Hebrews 12, and it has a context. If we go back earlier in the book of Hebrews, we'll see things. Let's just go to Hebrews 2. You'll see things that are very interesting as far as, the cloud of witnesses, the believers that are with the Lord. Well, who else is with the Lord? What else is going on there? If you go to Hebrews 2, we read this. For it was fitting, this is verse 10, it was fitting that he, again, we know who that is, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. Again, this is God and Jesus are in the picture here. For he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source. That is why he, and that Jesus in this case, is not ashamed to call them brothers, to call us brothers, saying, I will tell of your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation I will sing your praise. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children God has given me. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. So we have this scene in Hebrews 2 that's, again, put out somewhere in the ethereal future, but also, again, hearkening to the way God looks at things now and the way Jesus considers us now. But at some point, Jesus is saying, look, I'm not ashamed to call these human believers my brothers. Okay, I partook of flesh and blood, just like they did. And at some point, I'm going to present God to them and them to God in the midst of the congregation. Okay, this is council language, congregation. Greek term here is going to be used in the Septuagint for the divine council. You take that to Hebrews 12, we have a great cloud of witnesses, again, believers who have gone before us. Well, they're part of this family too. And if you keep reading in Hebrews 12, it's not just verse 1, but you get down to verse 22. Writer of Hebrews writing to these believers that are, going to be part of this great cloud of witnesses. You have come. It's this already language. You have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus. Jesus is there too. Mediator of a new covenant, to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. So again, here we have this cloud of witnesses language. This is your individual destiny language. And it's cast at the heavenly Jerusalem. Okay, innumerable angels in festal gathering, assembly of the firstborn enrolled in heaven. Okay, this is the individual destiny of the believer, to be in the family of God, to be really, again, part of the divine council. There's a lot of places you could loop this into as well. I mean, there's really a lot of this in the New Testament. My favorite is probably 1 Corinthians 6:3, though, which is really an obscure verse. This is when Paul is talking to the Corinthians about why they shouldn't be taking each other to court, over this and that, suffering loss and whatnot. And he, to summarize, he says, why are you doing this? Don't you know that you're going to judge angels, which is really an odd thing to say. In the midst of this, what is he talking about? Judging angels, it really takes you into the vocabulary of the divine council again, because the sons of God, if you think about the council structure, you have God at the top, the triune God, and then sons of God, we said at one of our conversations, we said this is language that is drawn from the royal court of the ancient world. The people who are related to the king get more authority. They're this middle tier, and then you have the bureaucracy underneath them, the messengers, the errand boys, the service staff, okay? Well, the sons of God are above the third tier. In the third tier in the Israelite council were the messengers, the angels. It's all the term means, the malachim, the messengers. They are lesser rank than we are. Even though we're created, Psalm 8, a little lower than the Elohim in Psalm 8, a little lower than, some want to say that just means a little lower than God. Well, when the writer of Hebrews quotes Psalm 8, he has a little lower than the angels. So created-wise, we're lesser than them, but we actually are going to join their ranks. And Paul's saying, that's not all. You're going to judge them. You're going to be, again, in some sense, outranking them. And I personally think that has to do with, in the New Eden, when we inherit the nations, when we inherit the earth, who is in control of the earth now? Well, it's, again, members of the council who rebelled. They forsook their allotment. They abused their charge. It's the fallen gods of the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 32, worldview, principalities and powers. They're going to be displaced because in Revelation 2:26, Revelation 3:24, Jesus says, to the ones that overcome, I will put them over the nations. To the ones that overcome, they will sit with me on my throne to share my rule, again, over everything. So we're going to judge them. We're going to displace them. We are going to see their final removal, and we will replace them in the council. We will be the replacements for all that has been lost. So again, all of this language is about both individual destiny and, in some cases, sort of the New Eden destiny, but it's really about glorification. And I think that the council stuff, the heavenly host stuff, helps us to sort of parse the vocabulary and see that the vocabulary is not random. The vocabulary is very intentional. It's supposed to make you think of certain things and certain ideas and certain concepts that come right out of the Old Testament.
Dr. Hesier, what other vocabulary in the Deuteronomy 32 worldview influenced the New Testament writers, specifically Paul, but others?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are some things that happen in Deuteronomy 32 that are specific to this. Let's just turn to 1 Corinthians 10, and I'll show you the example I'm thinking of here. In 1 Corinthians 10, again, this is the part of Paul's letter, first letter to the Corinthians, where in chapters 8, 8 through 10, we'll just say 8 through 10, he's talking about the meat sacrificed to idols and that whole, thorny question. And so, in chapter 8, he more or less says, look, who cares? We know that, an idol is nothing. It's just, to them there are many lords and many gods. To us there's one Lord and one God. And, we know who our God is, and they have their gods. And an idol's just, this thing made out of stone. It's part of their system. Yes, there's a connection between their gods and this object and whatnot. But, honestly, so what? Our God's better than their God, and he has a really sort of low-brow view of it, like it's not a big deal. That kind of changes when he hits chapter 10. Okay, and people have noticed this because he's talking about the same subject, and he says this. I'll just start back in verse 14. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. So he's concerned about believers actually drifting over into idolatry. I speak as to sensible people. Judge for yourselves what I say. The cup of blessing that we bless, is it not a participation in the blood of Christ? So he's referring to, again, the cup at the Lord's table, communion, all right? Okay, when we do this, aren't we like participating in the blood of Christ when we do this? When the bread that we break, is it not a participation in the body of Christ? Because there's one bread, we who are many are one body, for we all partake of the one bread. Consider the people of Israel. Okay, and here's where he actually quotes and alludes to several things in Deuteronomy 32. Of course, Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9 is where the nations are divided, allotted to the sons of God and so on and so forth. And if you keep reading in Deuteronomy 32, we get to Israel's apostasy, where they, in verse 17, they did not worship, God, Eloah is the word in Hebrew. And some English translations have it as a plural, which they shouldn't, because Eloah is a singular. It always refers to the God of Israel. Okay, so they don't worship God. Instead, they worship Elohim that they didn't know, and those Elohim are called Shadim in Deuteronomy 32:17, which in our English Bibles is usually translated demons. So keep that in mind, because Paul is going to be alluding to this right here when he's talking about this participation in idolatry. He says, consider the people of Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrifices participants in the altar? What do I imply then? That food offered to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No. I imply that what pagans sacrifice they offer to demons and not to God. There's the line from Deuteronomy 32:17. I do not want you to be participants with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. I mean, how many times does he have to mention this? So, on one hand, it's very obvious that Paul believes that demons were real. He's quoting Deuteronomy 32:17, and so he's taking Deuteronomy 32:17 at face value. These are other gods. They're real. We don't want to mess with them. We do not want to be participants with them, because they are cosmic evil entities. And demons is the umbrella term. Now, why bring this up? Because in this passage, you can very clearly see that Paul is led by Deuteronomy 32:17 thinking. We do not want to end up like the Israelites ended up. The Israelites worshipped other gods. They did so by doing different things, okay? When we need to watch what we do here in the specific matter with meat sacrificed to idols, so that we cannot be connected to, we don't end up participating in rituals that would make us idolaters. Now he's going to go on and say, look, if the meat is sold in the marketplace, don't worry about it. He has that sort of out. So what that tells us is that what he's really connected with is participation in some ritual. But he considers the gods of the Deuteronomy 32 worldview to be real. He refers to them as demons, demonic forces. So that's sort of an obvious illustration where Paul is looking at the situation in this pagan city. Again, he's the apostle to the Gentiles. He's looking at them and their gods and what they do and what they're sort of caught up in and trapped in. And he wants them to know, yeah, these are real spiritual forces. Don't mess with them. Okay? Or else we're going to be just like Israel. If you keep reading Deuteronomy 32, that story does not end well. They go into exile. They are ultimately kicked out of the land. So it's very much on his mind. The other place, you see this a lot of places in Paul, but 1 Corinthians 5 comes to mind. This is again another odd passage. These are all sort of odd passages to us, where Paul, again, writing to the same group. It's the Corinthians, so it's just a few chapters earlier, 1 Corinthians 5. He's writing to them about someone in the congregation there who has not repented of some pretty serious sin. That a man that has his father's wife, so there's some sort of extramarital, incestuous, whatever going on. And he even says the Gentiles don't even do this stuff, and this one will not own up to it. And so what does he say? Let me just get the language here, because he uses a really strange phrase in 1 Corinthians 5 that kind of troubles some people. But again, the Deuteronomy 32 worldview is the context for it. When you are assembled, I'll back up one verse. I've already pronounced judgment on the one who did such a thing. When you are assembled in the name of the Lord Jesus and my spirit is present with the power of our Lord Jesus, you are to deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. Like, deliver him unto Satan. Later on, he goes on and he talks about, he still wants this person to repent. In 2 Corinthians, we get indications that the guy did repent, so he's part of the body of Christ and whatnot. This is cosmic geographical language. Remember back in the Old Testament, the wilderness was associated with where the bad things are, okay? In the wilderness wanderings, the presence of God was with Israel. Everywhere else around the camp was not, okay? That was chaos, it's wilderness, it's the place of death. And, we've talked about these metaphors before in the thinking. The nations, there's Israel, everything around them is under dominion. At the Day of Atonement, okay, when the sins of the nation were put on the goat, the head of the goat, the one that was not sacrificed, where is the goat driven? Out into the wilderness. Okay, where does Jesus meet Satan? In the wilderness. I mean, you get all these themes that in Jewish thought, if you were outside holy ground, you are in a place where Satan lives, the demonic forces live. This is their turf. You need to be attached to the land, attached to the presence of God to be safe, okay? To worship God and be where you belong. If you're not, you're out there. That is the realm of death, the realm of Satan, the realm of cosmic evil. So when Paul says, deliver this guy to Satan, it means put him out of the church, because now the church, in New Testament thought, now the church is holy ground. The church is the temple of the living God. Every believer is inhabited by the same, Spirit of God that, dwelled in the tabernacle. All this language that we get in the New Testament. So he's saying, this is where sin goes. It is not to be retained in here. It is to be removed. And again, hopefully this person will come back. We welcome him back if he's repentant. But if he's not, this is where it belongs. So again, it's just another passage where it tells you that they're thinking of this in or out. Friend or foe, you're with the Lord or you're with cosmic evil forces. All of this sort of Deuteronomy 32 mindset. Peter does the same thing in 1 Peter 3 and in a wonderfully weird passage. But that's probably a subject for another time.
In 1 Peter 3, I'm curious about why Jesus had to go down and preach to the spirits in hell.
Yeah, you're not alone. This is actually a favorite passage of mine. It wasn't my watershed event as far as, all this cosmic supernatural evil stuff, but it's a memorable, I did have a memorable event with this passage in graduate school. My wife and I were looking for a church at one point, and we were going to this little church. And the guy was just doing such a good job. It's a book study through 1 Peter, and we were there 3-4 weeks, and we just thought it was great. Like this is the one, we're going to wind up here, And then we went somewhere else for a week or two, and then we came back, and we happened to come back on the morning that we hit this passage, 1 Peter 3, 14 through 22, which if you read it, it's just weird. Okay, you got the spirits in prison, you got the days of Noah, you have the ark, you have baptism, what's going on here? Angels, authorities, powers, resurrection. It's like, Peter wanted to talk about all these things at once and just threw them into one passage, and you guys deal with it. I like all these subjects, so here we go. It doesn't seem to have any logic to it, and it's just strange that you get this idea of descending and preaching to the spirits, imprisoned in the underworld. And so I'm really looking forward to this message, because he's done such a good job, up to this point. And he literally gets up in the pulpit. It's the only time I've ever seen this happen, thankfully. And says, well, we're supposed to have a sermon this morning on 1 Peter 3, 14 through 22. And I just got to confess, it's just so weird and so strange. I'm just going to skip it. So he literally skipped it. And we didn't even really need to have a conversation about whether we were going to get in there. Because it's like, come on, just try. Like say something. Don't just skip it. But he actually skipped it. It's unbelievable. So I have kind of a personal attachment to this. It is weird, but it's not incomprehensible if, again, you're familiar with this supernatural worldview. again, going back to the three rebellions, the three reasons why the world is the chaotic mess it is. You got the fall, you got the Genesis 6 episode, with the sons of God, and then you've got the Babel event. Well, this one actually tracks on the middle one. And you think, well, Genesis 6, the sons of God, daughters of men, Nephilim stuff. Well, the sons of God part, because what happens, we get the reference to Noah and the ark here, which is sort of the obvious entry point. And we could go to 2 Peter, where Peter again takes that incident as angels, plural, supernatural beings that sinned, okay? So we know mentally he's there, and he does certain things in 2 Peter that tracks on the story from the broader Jewish context, specifically the book of Enoch, where the angels that sin are sent to Tartarus. Our translations have in 2 Peter 2:4 that they are sent to hell or sent to Hades or something like that. But the Greek verb is actually tartarao. They are sent to Tartarus. And Tartarus was the classical Greek version of the place where the Titans, the offending Titans, and they're linked to giant traditions. And it's the Genesis 6 stuff again, okay? But this is where the offenders are sent. This is their special place in hell, Tartarus, okay? And Peter actually uses this term. So it's very evident that Peter knows the story. He takes the story at face value. He has a supernatural worldview. And so these are the spirits that are being preached to that are imprisoned there because, again, all of the traditions, whether it's the original Mesopotamian one, New Testament, classical Greek, Dead Sea Scrolls, texts like Enoch, the bad guys all end up imprisoned in hell. To quote Peter, kept in chains of gloomy darkness, all right? But what does that have to do with Jesus? There's just so many weird things going on here. But if you accept the story, again, at face value, if you don't reject the supernatural element, and you remember that, Peter tracks on Enoch stuff in several places. That's actually the clue. That is the hinge upon which the whole thing turns. And the way to really approach this is to be familiar with something called typology. Now I've actually used this term a bit in a few other questions that we've had during the times we've met. Typology, I think the easiest way to think about this is we know what prophecy is. Prophecy is the verbal prediction of something to happen. Okay, the key element there is verbal. A typology concerns non-verbal predictions, non-verbal foreshadowings of things to come. So the Passover lamb is a type, and Paul actually uses this term in 1 Corinthians 10, that the Passover lamb was a tupos, a type of Christ, okay? The Passover lamb foreshadows something in the future. In this case, it's the Passover lamb and the sacrifice of Jesus. But you have a number of types between the Old and New Testament. Paul uses the term again when he refers to Adam. Adam was a type of Christ. There are things about Adam that foreshadow Jesus. First Adam, second Adam. Paul uses that language. So there are these things that are comparable, but the original thing, the Old Testament thing, actually foreshadows or predicted something to come. And this could be an institution or event, a person. It could be a lot of different things. Well, just as Adam was a type, a foreshadowing of Jesus for Paul, what we need to get in our heads is that for Peter, Enoch was a foreshadowing of things that would come, connected specifically with Jesus. You say, well, what is that? Well, if you knew the Enoch story, it would click in your heads right at this moment, because the Enoch story is the Watchers, the sons of God, descend to Mount Hermon. They hatch this plot, again, to corrupt humanity. They do what they do. Everything turns into chaos with the Nephilim and everything like this. And you get this scene in Enoch where God tells his archangels, I've seen what's going down on earth, and this is really terrible. And he sends archangels down there to wipe out, the Nephilim and to bind the Watchers and imprison them. And so this is what's in process, what's going on in the story. And so the Watchers are like, oh no, we don't want to end up, in the abyss forever or whatever, So they get the idea, okay, who does God really like? Who would God listen to on our behalf because we're sorry? And they think of Enoch. Okay, Enoch is the one who walked with God and was taken to heaven. So they somehow get word to Enoch, and we're not told how, but they get word to Enoch, will you go to God and tell him we're sorry and ask him to like let us out. We'll never do it again, all this kind of stuff. And so Enoch takes their plea to God. And God says, no. It's a real short conversation. Sends Enoch, and here's the key, sends Enoch back. Enoch has to descend to the abyss, and he pronounces judgment on the watchers. The Lord has heard your plea, and the answer is no. You're going to be here until the end of time, day of the Lord, all this language, okay? He announces their condemnation. You lose. Okay, what you sought to accomplish is over. We're cleaning house here. You're not getting out. You're under condemnation. Now, what Peter does with that story is he strikes analogies. Okay, he sees one thing as foreshadowing the other. So if you go back to the passage, Jesus suffers for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through water. And then he starts launching into baptism, which is really important. Baptism corresponds to this. Now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God with angels, authorities, and powers having been subjected to him. What the passage really means is that, look, just as Enoch went to preach to the spirits in prison and announced that they were condemned, okay, you don't get forgiveness for this. Jesus goes down, descends to the spirits in prison. And again, he's there. This is unexpected because he's the Son of God. You're in the realm of the dead. Like, what are you doing here? And so he is there to affirm to them, yes, I'm here. I've been put to death. But you are still condemned. Because he knows something that they don't. I'm not going to be here very long. Okay? I am going to rise from the dead. We have the reference to the resurrection here. And when Peter says baptism corresponds to this, what it in fact does is it turns baptism, the act of baptism, into essentially spiritual warfare, because when you're buried with Christ in baptism, you descend into the grave, okay, into the underworld with him, and you rise from the dead. That message is not only to the people watching your baptism that you're a believer, but it messages to the cosmic powers that you are dead, but you are not going to stay in the realm of the dead with them. This is their realm, not yours. It's not the realm of Jesus. It's not our realm, because we are going to rise with him at the last day. So it's actually a declaration of whose side you're on, who you're united to. You do not share their fate. It's a repetition of their defeat. Okay? Jesus going down there and rising from the dead is an announcement and a repetition, a reinforcement, a reiteration to cosmic evil that you are defeated. And everyone who is mine, and who is united to me through the resurrection, when they get baptized, this is what it symbolizes. They're choosing sides, and it's not yours. They will not share your destiny. Okay? You're on your own, fellows. This is what you get. So the passage, I think, is really significant theologically, and this is why, just as a side note, in the early church, a real early church, the earliest baptismal formulas included some line about the renunciation of Satan and the principalities and powers, Satan and the demons, associated with baptism. This is why they did it, because they understood the imagery going on here, the connection between this act in the outward world and what it signaled in the spiritual world. We don't really do that anymore today, at least most church traditions don't, but in the early church that was very common.
So verse 21 says baptism saves you.
Mhm.
I thought we were saved by grace alone. So
Mhm.
what does he mean by this?
Yeah, I think we need to know that we need to note the correspondence language and then ask a couple of questions about the vocabulary. So baptism, which corresponds to this, well, to what? To the descent and then ultimately the resurrection. It's not that the act of baptism saves us, it's the thing that baptism corresponds to that saves us. Okay, so the death of Jesus and the resurrection ultimately. And you get this language in what follows. An appeal, baptism is not a removal of dirt from the body, but an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Christ. And so we have this point reinforced. Some of this is translation difficulties. The word translated appeal in Greek could be translated pledge, and that's actually what I prefer here too, because I think it just lends more clarity. And conscience, we usually think of conscience, the Greek word is synodesis, as that thing inside of us that determines right from wrong. But the term can also mean sort of loyalty or conscientiousness, taking care to do what's right, that kind of thing. So if you look at it from that perspective, baptism is a pledge that expresses your loyalty, that you're going to follow the one who died and rose again. So again, the thing that baptism prefigures or corresponds to is what saves you, the act of Christ dying and rising again. That's what actually saves you. And your baptism is essentially your loyalty oath, okay, which in the context, you are aligning yourself with the one who died and didn't stay there, who announced the defeat of the cosmic powers and rose again, which is why the passage ends the way it does. He's gone into heaven, is at the right hand of God with angels, authorities, and powers having been subjected to him. He's superior, in every way. So again, this is why with baptism in the early church, they thought this was significant, that we need to somehow, when we watch someone get baptized, we need to be thinking that this is a defeat of cosmic evil, and it's a way to demonstrate which side we're on. We do not share their destiny. Those sorts of thoughts I think are really important in the passage.
She was his wife, just trying to make the world a little better, shine a light. People started talking, just to hear their own voice. Those people try to accuse my father, say he made the wrong choice. Though it might be painful, the time will always tell. Those people have lost since gone, my father never failed. Even when the rain falls, even when the flood starts rising, even when the storm comes, I am washed by the water. Even when the rain falls, even when the flood starts rising, storm comes, I am washed by the water. Even when the earth crumbles under my feet, even when the ones I love turn around and crucify me, I won't ever, ever let you down. Won't go, won't go, won't go.
And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea. And they marched up over the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints in the beloved city. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them, and the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever.
So our modern context for the word Armageddon is kind of a loaded term. Can you explain to us a better context for where that's going to take place and what that means from a biblical perspective?
Yeah, and since everybody's sort of so into prophecy, this is one of those subjects where when I get into it, people just look at me like, you're crazy. But if you think about kind of the way it's understood, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, typically, traditionally. For instance, you'll typically hear that the Battle of Armageddon is supposed to be at Mount Megiddo, because Megiddo kind of looks like Megiddo, Megiddo, Harmageddon, Armageddon. So there's this association that is just sort of assumed. But the problem is, if you look up Megiddo, online, get a picture of it, or if you've ever been there, there's no mountain there. And you say, well, why should I care about a mountain? It's because of what John says in Revelation. So where does the term Armageddon come from? In Revelation 16:16, here's where he uses the word. They assembled them at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Okay, this is where the only place that the term is going to be used in the New Testament. And the key is that John is giving them a Hebrew term. Now, he's writing in Greek, so you'd have to be looking at the Greek to get this. If you looked at it in the Greek, it's not Armageddon, it's Har-Mageddon. And the H sound there is important because in Hebrew, the word har, the first part of it, is mountain. There is no mountain at Megiddo. It's a flat plain. It's about as flat as you can get. Now, there's a little mound there. That was the city. It's an archaeological tell. It's overgrown now, but that is not a mountain, okay? So we're dealing with some sort of mountain, Har-Mageddon. And the quick way to really get at this is to, visually, it's not that difficult to illustrate, but in Hebrew, there are two letters that get the G sound, like G. One of them is Gimel, G, and that is the G in a word like Megiddo. But the other one is the G sound you get in the word like Gomorrah. It's actually not the letter G in Hebrew. It's still G, but it's not the letter G. It's the letter Ghayan. So if we think, well, that second letter that sounds like a G, is there a word that would make sense after the word har, mountain in Hebrew, that we have an M, a G, and a D, that would give sense to this Hebrew term? Because John says this is in the Hebrew tongue, Har-Mageddon. And there is. It's the Har-Mored, which shows up in Isaiah 14. Well, let's go to Isaiah 14, and you'll see right away that this is kind of spooky. Isaiah 14. This is the so-called Lucifer passage, the Hallel ben Shachar, the shining one, the son of the dawn. This is, again, one of the passages that's the backdrop to this initial cosmic rebellion. How are you fallen? This is verse 12. From heaven, O day star, son of the dawn, Hallel ben Shachar. How are you cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low? You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. Above the stars of God, I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the Har-Mored. I will sit on the Mount of Assembly in the far reaches of the north. Okay? Well, what mountain in the far reaches of the north might be in view here? Go to Psalm 48. Psalm 48, and remember the phrase far reaches of the north, because that term in Hebrew is going to be in this passage, it's precisely the same term. So Psalm 48, verse 1. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, it's Jerusalem, obviously, His holy mountain, beautiful in elevation, is the joy of all the earth, Mount Zion in the far north. There you have that far north. It's Yarkate in Hebrew. That was in Isaiah 14. The city of the great king. Now here's a question for you, geography question. Think about Israel. You know where Jerusalem is. You got this sort of, cylinder-shaped country. Jerusalem is where? Is it north or south? It's in the south. It's in the south. It's in the southern kingdom, tribe of Judah. Well, how can Mount Zion be in the far north? How can it be in the Hebrew is Tzafon, in the Yarkate Tzafon, the heights of the north? Why is it the same language as the original cosmic rebel said, I will sit above the stars of God? Okay. I will, take my seat, the highest seat in the Mount of Assembly in the far reaches of the north. It's because in biblical thought, the north was a place of fear and dread and threat. In human terms, this is where armies came from. If you remember way back in high school, history of civilization, maybe in college, you learned about something called the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia. You don't go from like Babylon over to Israel to attack it. You don't cross the desert because you're not idiots, right? Your army's going to die. There's no water there. You follow the river system and then you come back down. Everybody invades from the north, from the north, from the north. And so they just got gun shy over the north. The north was a bad place, but the north is also bad for another reason. It is the domain of Baal. Baal's mountain is in the far north. Jebel el-Akra, was considered Baal's mountain. It is above, the regions of Bashan. It's way north. You realize what we're looking at here. We have the physical north, which is a terrible place because this is where we get attacked from. But even worse, this is where Baal lives. This is Baal's domain. Everything that is cosmic evil, Baal, this is his kingdom. This is his house up here. This is where he's from. And so this notion of the cosmic north being an awful, terrible place is quite, resident in the mind of the biblical writers. Now the reason why they take Zion and say, no, Zion is the city of the great king. Zion is in, the far north. Okay? Great is the Lord, greatly to be praised, the city of our God. Remember Psalm 68 about the conquest of Bashan, the conquest of the north. I will deliver them from Bashan and bring them down here. All of these things, this is the biblical writer's way of saying, no, it isn't Baal who is the greatest God, who controls everything. Yahweh rules the world from Zion. Baal doesn't rule the world from this place up here. Yahweh rules the world from down here. This is really the cosmic center of everything. It's not Baal's mountain. So when you go to Isaiah 14, this notion that the original rebel wants to be above the stars of God and wants to sit in the seat of authority in the heights of the north, that means I want to be in control of the universe. I want to be in control of everything. And he is punished. He's denied. Again, Isaiah 14, the famous, Lucifer's fall passage, if we can use that terminology. So all of that is important for Armageddon, because the Battle of Armageddon is not a battle at Megiddo. It is a battle for Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the Mount of Assembly. Jerusalem is, again, Mount Zion in the far north, the city of the great king. This is why Isaiah 24, which talks about, let's just go there, talks about the defeat of cosmic powers, says what it says. Isaiah 24, one quick passage here. On that day, this is the day of the Lord will punish the host of heaven in heaven. In other words, the spiritual beings in the spiritual world are going to get what's coming to them, and the kings of the earth on the earth. They will be gathered together as prisoners in a pit, shut up in prison. After many days they will be punished. Then the moon will be confounded, the sun ashamed. The Lord of hosts reigns on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem. And his glory will be before his elders. It's a reference to the divine council again. The Lord is going to be vindicated. In that day, when all the cosmic powers are defeated, the Lord is going to reign in Mount Zion in Jerusalem. I mean, we could go to other passages that talk about the final conflict. Where does the Messiah come back and touch his foot? Is it Megiddo? No, it's Jerusalem, okay? You have all these passages that have the cosmic upheaval, cataclysmic event in Jerusalem. And Armageddon is consistent with that. It's just that we've been sort of taught to think of Megiddo, just because of the similarity of the term. And what it means in the Hebrew tongue is the Har Moed, the Mount of Assembly. This is where the battle occurs. And the Mount of Assembly in biblical thought is Jerusalem. It is a battle for all the marbles in the end. So, again, even that is part of this sort of cosmic geographical worldview. But we often just don't see it because we're typically working with English translation, and in this case, a little bit of our own tradition.
So once this battle's over, the Battle of Armageddon, is that when the new heaven and earth comes?
Yeah, in this case, we actually sort of get a decent narrative of events. If you go to Revelation 20, and this is, let's just go to verse 9. It's describing this final conflict. They marched up over the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints in the beloved city. Okay, so Jerusalem is surrounded, but fire came down from heaven and consumed them. And the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Then I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it. From his presence earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So, at the end of the judgment, the day of the Lord, we have the final judgment. We have the destruction of Satan. We have the destruction, of the false prophet. Basically all the forces of evil are going to be destroyed. The righteous who are in the book of life are going to be vindicated, so on and so forth. And then if you look at verse 21, here's the answer to the question. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. Which is actually one of my favorite verses in the New Testament, because again, if you it's a really good verse to go to make the point that sometimes literal interpretation and over-literalizing things just totally misses the point. The point of this verse is not that, in the new earth there won't be any salt water. I guess that's good. I don't like dolphins anyway. No, that isn't the point. The point is not a comment about whether there's seawater or salt water or not. The sea was a symbol for chaos. The sea is a symbol of anti-Eden, and that is no more. So you have this restoration of Eden imagery. It's this perfect place. I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of the heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them and they will be his people," which again is familiar Old Testament language. God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. That sounds like Eden, again, an unfallen Eden. Neither shall there be mourning or crying or pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. And you go through the whole, the New Jerusalem, down in Revelation 21:9. The description there, we have, Spirit carries him to a great high mountain, showed me the holy city of Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. And then it's the gemstones, the luminosity. Remember the stones of fire, which is something we talked about a little bit earlier. Again, you get this cosmic, Edenic, garden, earth, cosmic mountain, cosmic garden. All these images sort of converge in the end into this one place, the New Jerusalem. There's a lot of symbolism going on here that combines a lot of things that have preceded it in the Old Testament. The way the dwelling of God is described in 5, 10, 15 passages, they all sort of conglomerate into this one. And again, that's deliberate because all of those things were precursors. All of them were foreshadowings. All of them were lesser versions of this. And so all of them contribute to its description. You get the river of life in chapter 22. Again, the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. Again, then you get this Edenic description, the tree of life. No longer is there anything accursed. The throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, his servants, worshiping with him. Night will be no more. They will have no need of lamp or sun, for the Lord God will be their light, and they will reign forever and ever. So these last two chapters are, again, by design. I mean, even the tree of life for the healing of the nations. You get that line. Everything just converges. Revelation 21 and 22, again, ought not to be overly literalized, because if you do that, you're going to be trying to paint a picture of it or build a Lego model of it, and that isn't the point. The point is that all of these images and all of the thoughts, the concepts they convey prior to this time, beginning with Eden all the way through, Eden, tabernacle, Zion, all these different mountains, temples, all of this talk and its description, again, just accumulates into this. And I think the reason it's done is that so that you can't miss it. It's so unusual, and you can pick parts of it and find parts of it elsewhere in the Old Testament for cosmic geography and sacred space, that you can't miss the point that all of these things feed into this. This is the ultimate endpoint for all of it. And again, in the context of the book of Revelation, believers get to share the reign of the Messiah. And if I could say one last thing about that, when we think about inheriting the earth, the earth being a global Eden, and we reign and rule with Christ, all those are legitimate, biblical ideas, obviously. But we need to not think of those things in terms of who do I get to be the boss of? This is typically where our mind goes. Like, who do I outrank? Do I outrank my wife or my husband? Or, my kids, or the guy at work that I really don't like, but I know he's a believer. I mean, we tend to think in this hierarchical sense. That isn't the point. The point is, it reverts back. Again, it's the reset button back to Eden, where everybody is imaging God. Everybody belongs there. Everybody's in sacred space. And what we're ruling is really the thing that God made for human habitation, which is the world. Okay, it's not ruling other people. It's enjoying Eden for what it was originally intended to be. So it will be what it was intended to be, and we will enjoy it and sustain it, maintain it, use it, utilize it, repurpose it. We'll do the things that God wanted us to do with creation in an eternal stewardship of what it is and enjoying it for what it was intended to be. So that, I think, just helps cast the whole Edenic idea at the end in a different light. It's not about hierarchy. There's only one hierarchy. There's the triune God, and we're with him. He shares everything. He rules and reigns and is with us. It's not that the Trinity grows. It's still the Trinity. But we are glorified to be as much like him as we can possibly be, which was his original intention, fit for sacred space with everyone else in his family. So it is the complete capstone vision, which is why it's cast the way it is at the end with the Edenic imagery. So that, again, in real brief summary form, is what we have to look forward to.
These are the days of Elijah, declaring the word of the Lord. And these are the days of your servant Moses, righteousness being restored. And though these are days of great trial, of famine and darkness and sword, still we are the voice in the desert, crying, prepare ye the way of the Lord. Behold, he comes, riding on the clouds, shining like the sun, at the trumpet call. Lift your voice, trumpet call, lift your voice in the year of Jubilee, and out of Zion till salvation comes. There is no God like Jehovah. 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 Behold, He comes, riding on the clouds, shining like the sun. At the trumpet call, lift your voice. It's the year of Jubilee, and down on Zion till salvation comes. Behold, He comes, riding on the clouds, shining like the sun. At the trumpet call, lift your voice. It's the year of Jubilee, and down on Zion till salvation comes. Behold, He comes, riding on the clouds, shining like the sun. At the trumpet call, lift your voice. It's the year of Jubilee, and out of Zion till salvation comes. Behold, He comes, riding on the clouds, shining like the sun. At the trumpet call, lift your voice. It's the year of Jubilee, and out of Zion till salvation comes. Lift your voice. It's the year of Jubilee, and out of Zion till salvation
Cut. Okay, go ahead and say it.
That's a wrap.
Just didn't want you to miss out there.
McKinnon, how's your Bible study? Lesson 2, segment 11, take 1.
Kyle, look at me. Turn to a profile. Look at that. Oh, that's his hair. Where? Oh, a crazy string.
Gonna get the scissors out.
Okay, here, just
It was actually called the Heights of the North. It's called Zaphon, the same terminology used of Mount Zion and Jerusalem in the Bible.
God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets many times in various ways.
That's the first time we've had that happen. It's the last thing. Let's back it up. Back it up.
I was telling Missy, we gotta have at least one good.
Right. There it was.
Really shows up on
One hair we've got to eliminate.
It's just that string.
It's the hat, Kyle. It's the
These guys can see it in the cameras. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Looks like his hair. Now it's sticking out of your mouth.
You take a razor and you just...
All right. Last one. 3, 2, 1. Go.
So Dr. Hesier, before you answer this last question, would this be a good time to pause and thank Jonna for all that work?
Yes, yes. Very, very well done. Very close.